right? All right, we're on session 5. I know you guys get tired of us saying this probably, but this is another jam-packed session with information that will be thrown at you today. So please do your best to listen intent and oh Lord, what's that word? Please make sure you listen
Attentively.
attention. Attentively.
There we
Thank
go.
you. Golly, getting tongue-tied.
Words
See,
are hard. Words are
black
hard.
coffee working already. See? So yeah, so we're going to be going into financial management and fundraising. We'll do some short recap from session 4 and go through, finish up strategic planning, and then we're going to move on to our next topic. So Dr. Palmer, would you like to address the group before we jump into it?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Just want to say good morning again and welcome back. Thank you for the opportunity to provide this resource of the Institute. Thank you for the opportunity to have been with you over the past, what is it now? 5 sessions. We've got one more to go. And so welcome back, everyone. Rebecca, am I up for, I just want to make sure. Is that me or is that
Yep.
you? Is that me?
Yeah, we're on slide. Yes.
I think you're first slide 6, and then I'll
Yep.
take it from
Oh,
there.
Yep.
Is that okay?
yeah. All right. So when we met when we met last week, we were working on strategic planning. And so, just as a little bit of a reflection, we over the course of providing the institute and offering the strategic planning topic, there's a framework for writing goals. And so, when we did our work last week, we used the framework of SMART goals. And after doing some research, Rebecca in particular on our team, after doing some research, identified that there are what we call smarter goals and SMART goals, smarter goals and SMART goals. And so in thinking about the SMART, the SMART goals being specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time bound, and there being an evaluation component, and then also a revision part of the process. So if you remember from last week, as it relates to strategic planning, we spent time drafting a goal statement, an outcome statement, and then also writing what action steps might go along with that. And so if you go out there and you decide that you want to do a little bit more research, here are some prompts for you. So smarter goals, and then SMART goals would incorporate being inclusive and equitable. And so what we do with the framework, either of the three, is that we look at our goals and we look at our outcomes and we try to make sure that we have elements of each of the parts of the frames here. And so smart, smarter, smarty, smart, smarter, smarty. Rebecca, you're up next.
All right. We'll go to the next slide. So here we find that looking at the smarter goal here, we have recognize and reward down here, but you can also add revise to that. All ours. We want to think about our goals, that we're constantly updating them. We're looking at progress. We want to make sure we recognize both individual and organizational efforts to meet goals. And a goal is only as good as you're able to track it. So making sure that you have you have a system set up for tracking goals is really key. We've seen the evolution from smarter goals to SMART goals, and I'll have go to the next slide here and have somebody read these examples of a SMART goal versus a SMART goal, where we have an inclusive aspect and equitable aspect. Does somebody want to offer up their voice to us? It may be the first time you've spoken this morning.
Just to like read out the Smarty goals.
Yep.
Okay.
Smart and then the Smarty to show us an example of each.
Okay, so a SMART goal, expand youth mentorship program in 3 new counties by the end of June. And then the Smarty goal is expand youth mentorship program into 3 new counties by the end of June with volunteer task force that are representative of the community by age, gender, race, and other characteristics, advising the expansion.
Do you all recognize and see how much richer that goal is? And how much more likely it is to be successful in the communities that you're working with when you've taken into consideration those additional voices and perspectives. So when we're thinking about an inclusive goal, we want to be asking, how does this goal invite traditionally excluded individuals to make decisions and contribute in a way that shares power? So when you think of inclusive, think about how we share power. And then equitable goals, do they include an element of fairness or justice that seeks to address systemic injustice, inequity, or any type of oppression? So you can think of the attributes of fairness or justice when you're looking at your goals. How does this address that? And so I invite you all to think about this as you're developing goals and you're working on your strategic planning. Do some of you, by raise of hands, have some of you been through this process of looking at your strategic planning and goal setting with an inclusive and equity lens? Okay, so good. I'm seeing some hands. What was the process like? Does anyone want to share for us real quick? If you can let us know what that was like. Anybody? Be brave.
I can share that when we were doing our strategic plan a few years ago, one of the key things we realized is that we weren't doing a good enough tracking of demographics. And so that was a key thing that we changed moving forward, is that when we bring in new members, that we kind of track demographics a little bit better. And that's helped us too in when we receive opportunities, you know, for veterans or for a specific group, then we've got that tracking of demographics that we can send to. So I guess that's one way that we kind of changed our behavior to reach our goals around that.
That's great. That's great. The
Thank you,
data and
Allison.
information being knowledge and fuel for really getting a good sense of your demographics, your population is always a good thing to incorporate. Anyone else have anything burning they want to share about Smarty goals?
I'll go ahead and share a little bit from CLC.
Sure.
So one thing that we did was we started to look at where we held some of our volunteer work days. Ordinarily, they were places where you needed a car to get to them, and they were a bit far out from the center of Charlotte. So we started looking at locations that were closer to major centers of living, but also close to public transit, so that it wasn't, folks didn't just have to rely on a vehicle to get to where a workday was going to be held. We also tried to hold them outside of the work week so that more people are able to get to them, ideally on the weekends.
That's great. That's really good. That would be a really good example of an equitable goal, because you're looking at how you can address systemic injustice, inequity, perhaps, if you will, that seeks to sort of level the playing field, right? And allow access to people. So well done. That's great. Thank you for sharing. I really appreciate you being brave and putting yourself out there. And great job. I encourage all of you to be thinking about this and to take this back to your teams and to sort of be the voice in the room who is thinking through these things and helping others to think about them as well. Thanks for sharing. Any questions before we move on past smarter and smarty goals? We've even talked about combining them as smartery goals. What else can we add to this acronym?
Oh, boy. Oh, boy. Oh, boy.
Well, thanks, everyone. Okay, we will move on to our next slide, slide 9. So we've done a quick review and reflection of strategic planning, and talked about our goal setting. And we're keeping it short because we're actually covering 2 topics today. We're going to be super efficient, and we're going to be talking through financial management. We've got a special guest with us today who will be sharing about financial management. So you get to hear from a voice that's different than ours, which we're always welcoming. And then we'll, after a break, we'll move into our fundraising topic, which I know if we get any questions, it's definitely about fundraising. Folks have lots of questions about fundraising, right? And that's something that we all struggle with and something that we all can learn more about. So we'll do that. We've got plenty of things that we cover within each of those sections. And then we'll have our session evaluation and we'll prep for our graduation because, believe it or not, this is our second to last session. So next week will be our last session. So we'll do some quick prep around graduation, get you all prepped for that. And then we'll have our closing at the end of that. Any questions before we dive in? All right.
And if Rebecca, if nobody has any questions, if we can go back to the gallery view for a moment before we go into, I just want to see everybody. You know, I have to do this every week. I just have to kind of scroll through and see who I can see. And um, my grandmother used to say, lay eyes on you. Anybody ever heard that? If you're from North Carolina, you probably heard of that. I just want to lay eyes on you this morning and make sure that you're all good and that we can get ready for our 2 topics today, as Rebecca mentioned. Give me an idea of how you're feeling. Use the react. Let me see, or you can use hand motions or eye language, whatever you want, however you want to do that. If we were in a space together, I would be walking around the room, chatting and talking and touching base and checking in with everybody. And so I know we've already said welcome back 1,000 times today, but I'm gonna say it again. Welcome back and good morning, and prepare yourselves for, as Lisa mentioned, quite a bit of information. And our goal is to try to share with you aspects of managing a nonprofit that are fundamental, but also that's practical and hands-on and all of that. And so our cadence for today, you're going to be referencing some electronic documents. We're going to be providing links for you. So for those of you who are still getting accustomed to picking up information from the chat, from a link, where are my folks? Because I still struggle with that kind of stuff. Like, where do you save it? Where do you store it? You know, what about when the Zoom call goes off? How do I get to the information? But we're going to be using the chat to share some links with you as we walk through, in particular, our financial management information today. And so kind of keep that in mind as far as just what the cadence will be like. And then on the fundraising side, we've got some hands-on tasks that we're going to do around prospecting donors. We're going to do that. And then also around what is the fundamental common framework for thinking about how fundraising works. which is we're going to do some hands-on with the fundraising pyramid. So just want to kind of prepare you for what our work is going to look like to today. I don't know, team, if I've left anything out, just chime in there. We know there's a lot going on, both in our local communities, statewide, and definitely nationally as it relates to how we access and acquire resources to do the work that we have been charged to do by way of the missions that your organizations represent. And so as we go into talking about really money today, we're talking about how to manage our finances. We're going to be talking about how to raise money, an approach to doing that. In the midst of some of our organizations not being sure about funding and about where our dollars or monies are coming from. And so I just want to kind of lift that up as we go into learning about these two topics, recognizing that reality is in your midst while you're in this training and while you're trying to acquire this knowledge and skill. We realize that many of you are probably in a space of, when it comes to dollars and funding and all of that, what's happening. Some of us were just not sure. And so I want to acknowledge that. And I want you to know that we at the center are thinking about you, and we are having discussions in our prep work and planning work of all the opportunities that we offer, that we recognize that. And so I just want to lift all of you up this morning in this space. And we hold you all in high regard, and we know that you've got some real life situations that you are addressing as it relates to finances and fundraising this morning. So I don't know if anybody wants to give voice to that on the center team. And then I don't know if anybody wants to give voice to that in the class. I'm going to pause for that.
Dr. Parma, this is Melanie Harris, and I'm in the class. I'm not on the team, but it's just a reminder, I think, for me to recognize the modeling of self-care for leaders in nonprofits, that because the anxiety oftentimes around job loss, for example, is so high, it's a really deep invitation to invite leaders, ourselves, but also all those on our team to take the time that they need to take the 15 minutes before the day begins to do whatever self-care is going to help. Sometimes that's in the culture of our nonprofits, but in most activist communities, self-care is not usually prioritized. And so it's a reminder that if you're going to be doing this justice work, you actually have to do justice to yourself.
Thank you, Melanie. Thank you for giving voice to where we are. Anybody else? I see, is that Kasara? Am I pronouncing that right? Thank you for your reaction there. Anybody else? Okay. Well, guess what? It's time to get to work. So we're going to get started with our work, and team. We can get ready to go to slide 10. We are going to do some small group work, some in breakouts. And so let's go to slide 10, and I'm going to give some direction. So our first topic today is financial management. And what we want to do here is we have posed a question. We've given you this image of a nonprofit at the end of its fiscal year, and the breakdown of where revenue has come from as it relates to this particular organization. And so we want you to grab your phones real quick. Just take a quick picture of the image here, or I see in the chat there's a link for this image. And what we want you to do in your breakout groups is we want you to answer this question. How does this pie chart represent a nonprofit with a diversified revenue stream? So how does this pie chart represent a nonprofit with a diversified revenue stream? That is the question that you are asking. And keep in mind when you go into your breakouts as well, introduce yourselves and all of that, and then begin to answer and discuss kind of what you see as representation of a diversified revenue stream for this nonprofit organization. Rebecca, I'm going to turn it over to you, I think.
Sure, yeah. So make sure you grab that link there in the chat. I'll go ahead and put instructions in the breakout chat so you can refer to that. And we'll give you 10 minutes and then we'll come back here and we'll share back to the big group. Any questions? All right. All right, we'll see y'all back in 10 minutes.
Well, welcome back from the breakout. Your task was to have a discussion around answering the question, how does this pie chart represent a nonprofit with a diversified revenue stream? So if I could just hear a couple, just kind of what was the essence of what you all were looking at as you were looking at this pie chart. Again, our two topics today are financial management, that's coming up next, and then fundraising will be the second part of our time together today. How did you all react to what you saw in this pie chart?
Jealous. It's pretty diverse.
Blake, I don't think I've heard that one before. I don't think I've heard jealous. I don't think I've heard that reaction. Talk to me a little bit more about about what you mean there.
Here, let me actually pull it back up. I didn't our group actually was trying to guess like what organization this might be and what corporate, that 2% of corporate funding, is that like this organization's head corporate office, or is this kind of corporate giving to be distinct from individual charitable giving? But as I was looking at this, the organization where I work is almost entirely program, fee for service, contracted outcomes, and very, very little additional. No charitable giving at all. Like less than $5,000 a year.
Okay.
And so I was just looking at this, admiring all the pretty colors. There's a lot of colors there. So.
So the corporate in this example, those could be corporate giving, meaning the corporation outright gave the dollars, but it could also be corporate grants, because we know that corporations also issue grants. And so in this example, it could be either one of those. I think the takeaway there, though, is that those dollars are coming from corporations.
Gotcha.
It also means, too, potentially, it could be that those are unrestricted or not unrestricted or restricted, too. So, but without all the details, you know, those are the ways you could think about that. But nonetheless, as a part of the portfolio, this organization is getting corporate gifts. Kasara, I saw your hand, and then Emily.
Emily and I were both in the same breakout group, so hopefully I
okay.
don't say what she was planning on sharing, but looking at that graph, you know, similar to what you just said, seeing so many pie slices indicate like diverse revenue streams, you know, and I think my first response was just kind of trying to grow some of the smaller ones. So trying to focus on the 1%, for example, or the 2%, just so they're like kind of more balanced across the board, rather than leaning so heavily on like the 3 larger slices.
Okay. What I will say there is that definitely there's room for growth in terms of increasing the amount of revenue that comes from any one of these sources. The individual is a place where I would put some emphasis because individual donations are typically unrestricted. And so there's 16% of the pie that's coming from there. The membership you mentioned, this organization is an organization where individuals can pay to be a member or to participate. And so that is a fee that they're paying that could also be in alignment with unrestricted dollars. So I agree with you there, you know, looking at the pie chart to say, okay, where might we be able to enhance our revenue? The one thing I would say is that when we start to identify where we want to increase our revenue, keep in mind capacity. And what capacity do we have to increase it? So if we're going to bring on more members, do we have the staff to serve those members? And is the membership fees and dues going to help us to be able to increase that on the capacity end? And then if we're going to focus on individual or giving or fundraising, the other part there too is, do we have the resources to invest in increasing or enhancing the way in which we fundraise? Because we've heard the adage, it takes money to make money. And so if we're going to engage in fundraising, oftentimes it takes dollars for us to be able to do that. I don't see any other hands or anything like that. So I want to make some more comments about this. And I would encourage you to take notes here because at a glance, when you look at this pie chart, you may react like Blake and be jealous, right? But when I look at this pie chart, I see that 80% of the revenue is coming from grants. And so if you look at government at the 8%, private foundations at 11%, United Way, and then that 29% programs, it doesn't appear, we don't have a fee for service item here. There could be a little bit of fee for service for that. But my sense is that's probably, we don't know that for sure. But this could be fees for services or it could be grants. So if we put that 29% in the mix, 80% of this, the dollars coming in is coming from is restricted. These are not unrestricted dollars. So that means there's guidelines, there's reporting, there are all these other administrative tasks that have to be completed there. So that would be a thought related to what you see. Definitely room to enhance the individual giving. It's at 16%. This organization could work to increase that. It'd be great if individual giving was at 50%. And then the grants and all that made up the remainder of the dollars that are coming in. Couple more points. Notice that there are how many revenue streams here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Is that 8 or 9? 8 revenue streams here. So there are 8 different ways in which dollars can come into the organization. Theoretically, we don't want more than 1/3 of our budget or our funding coming from one source, because if one source goes away, that puts us in jeopardy. And so there's that. I am working with the organization right now where that is the case. 90% of their funding came from grants. Those grants have slowed down, those grants have been decreased, and there's a little bit of crisis going on with that organization right now. And so we want to have at least 3 in that case. And then the other note to make is that this organization has a strength, and it looks like the strength is grant writing, grant administration, and grant management. Because if there's all of these, if there's several of these revenue streams that are grant oriented, and again, at a glance, this is at a glance, I identified 1, 2, 3, 4 of the 8 or 9 is coming primarily from grants, and so that puts some restriction there. So keep studying that pie chart. If you study it a little while longer, you're going to find some other nuances about what you see there, because at a glance, it looks like, oh my gosh, this is diversified and there are dollars coming from all these different places. But when you start to group where the grants are coming from, significant part of what it is they were able to acquire in this particular year is grants. And so those dollars are restricted. Moving into our topic, financial management, I am gonna pass it over to Lisa, and Lisa is going to introduce our my co-facilitator today on financial management. Lisa, I'm gonna let you introduce Tracy.
Great, thank you so much. So as we mentioned at the beginning, we're moving into the the next section, which will have a lot of financial information. Obviously, this is a high view of finances. So if you have questions, please put in the chat and our team will do our best to monitor and get those questions to Tracy. So Tracy is responsible for the overall financial operations of the center, as well as audit and tax functions, budgeting, policies, and procedures, and human resources. She began working at the center as an intern while attending Meredith College, where she received a BA Mathematics with a minor in accounting. She's a veteran of the center. She has more than 20 plus years of experience in nonprofit accounting and human resource management. Previously, she worked as a staff accountant with a CPA firm specializing in nonprofit accounting and financial consulting. She currently serves on the not-for-profit committee of the North Carolina Association of CPAs. So before we do that, though, I think it's best, and team, you can let me know how long, that you all take a quick break. That way, when you come back, you don't have to worry about leaving to follow Tracy in terms of how she's going through all the financial statements and how they should be done. So team, how about maybe 5 minutes, do a quick little break and then come on back? So
Sounds
it's
good.
great. So let's do a quick break. It's 10:15. See you back in 5 to get rolling. Thank you.
Well, hopefully you were able
Yeah.
to, oh, I'm sorry. Go
No,
ahead.
no.
Go
No,
ahead,
I was
Lisa.
just going to start welcoming people back. That's all. And so you
Mhm.
can go ahead.
Had to get that last drop of coffee in that second cup. But anyway, so welcome back. We're going to get started on our financial management topic. In your workbooks, let me just point out what you have available to you. Majority of the information that you're going to be working with today, however, is going to be provided through links by way of the chat. We're also going to be doing some screen sharing as well, so everybody can keep up. And so in your workbook on page 102, you have what we call a budget worksheet. And then we have on page 103, financial statements, examples of financial statements. We're going to go over these. The 990 for that same set, for that same organization, an annual report for that same organization, and then GAAP or general accepting accounting principles, which is also highlighted for you on page 104. So you have very few actual pieces of information in your workbook, but we're going to be providing information by way of the chat. I keep saying that because I don't want people to get lost and get frustrated, with, trying to keep up with us and what we're doing and knowing where information is. And so it might be a little hard to multitask because we're we're going to be going back and forth to these links. Try to kind of walk with us, if you will, as we go through the information. Team, we can go to slide 16. So financial management. We have three primary areas that we're going to be focused on, and Tracy is going to be helping us with this today. Financial transactions is the first part of what we're going to work on and learn about. Internal controls and audit is the second, and diversification of revenue is the third. We started off with the pie chart and that image of, well, what does it mean and what does it look like to diversify revenue? And that's an example. And even in looking at the example with 8 or 9 different revenue streams in which that organization receives dollars or funding, be it individual donations or be it grants, there were still some elements of that we needed to pay attention to in terms of long-term sustainability. It's great to be able to acquire grants to fund the work that we do, but 80% or 90% of funding coming from all grant funding could have its challenges. It may work out great over the years, but then again, we just want to be thinking, how can we improve and how can we enhance? So financial management, these are the three topical areas that we're going to be looking at today. And you can go ahead to the next slide. So here, kind of a little bit more specific in terms of what we're going to review and what we're going to cover today. The first is related to financial transactions. And team, I think it's okay for us to go ahead and put the document in the chat, the financial management handout. To go ahead and put that, it's got it's got all of these different sections on it, class, and we're going to be walking through what's there. So if we could go ahead and put that in the chat. So we're going to, in terms of guidelines related to financial transactions, each and every nonprofit has established what their guidelines and policies are. As it relates to how it manages its finances, and the way in which we conduct transactions. So for example, if we're writing checks, or how many signatures does a check have to have, or if you're using a credit card, what is the limit that a employee who it has access to using a credit card, what is the limit, the purchase limit? So when we talk about guidelines and policies, what we're talking about here are those guidelines and policies that are very unique to your nonprofit organization and how you handle transactions. Tracy, I'm going to let you chime in here if there's something you want to add in terms of how the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits, some of our guidelines and policies.
Yeah, I mean, I think you basically covered that, Dr. Palmer. Just, adding that again, these different types of guidelines and policies are just going to clarify the roles, the authority, the responsibilities for these sort of essential financial management activities and decision making. So, if you don't have some of these documented, it's important to do that. The reality is you're probably doing some of this in your everyday work and how you go about processing transactions and preparing budgets and things like that. So it's always good to have them documented, whether it's in your bylaws or in a separate document.
Thank you. The other thing too, to take in consideration when we're talking about guidelines and policies is whether or not your nonprofit has a finance committee, and whether or not as one of your officer roles, you have a treasurer. because typically the finance committee might be chaired by that treasurer and then interfaces with the staff. And in this case, it would be Tracy for us, interfaces with that individual to have ongoing oversight and management of the financial transactions that take place. Tracy, did you want to chime in with that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think you just spoke to it, is that these are going to be different for each organization, and a lot of cases based on your size. I mean, some nonprofits may not have you know, a staff that is interfacing with the committee aside from the executive director. And so you do just want to make sure that you're being transparent and be communicating with your board around these financial transactions. It's also a good way, if you do have a smaller staff, to loop in others on these activities to help separate duties, so that you can make sure that you've got some good practices around how these are being handled. So it is just a little bit different for everyone, just depending on your organization.
Thank you. Thank you, Tracy. And then also kind of moving down our list under duties and responsibilities as it relates to financial transactions. So revenues and expenses. So we're receiving dollars into the organization, and then we're expending dollars when we make purchases and when we are buying or procuring, you know, items or payroll or any of those things that we're purchasing. So when you think about financial transactions, how, in terms of guidelines and policies, how do we bring dollars into the organization and keep a record of our revenue? And then how do we expend dollars and keep a record of how we're spending the revenue that we are generating? Tracy, I'm gonna let you chime in if there's something you want to add there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it in its most basic form, and it doesn't mean that you have to have, you know, a sophisticated system to be able to do that, because that may not be right for your nonprofit, but just so that you are sort of tracking and paying attention, like Dr. Palmer said, to the revenue that's coming in and the expenditures that are going out. Is just sort of a basic thing that needs to happen on a regular basis within your nonprofit.
And so that leads us to our budget. So each and every year, we should be writing, creating, developing a budget. And that budget should be shared. Oftentimes, the budget is built with several staff members, depending upon what your roles are. But we develop that budget so that we can show what we anticipate in revenue and what we anticipate in expenses. And then from there, throughout the year, we are reporting out on how we are doing related to that budget. And we're reporting out by way of a statement of financial position, a statement of activities, a statement of cash flows, and a statement of functional expenses. So the budgeting and the reporting out in terms of the statements are in alignment, or should be in alignment. So what we want to do here is we want to show you a sample budget. We're going to share our screen. We're going to show you a sample budget, and it is for the North Carolina Center. And we're going to let Tracy talk to us about how the center budgets each and every year. So team, if we could show the sample budget. It's a proposed budget that we're showing.
Yeah, and while the team pulls that up, just to pick up on what Dr. Palmer was just saying around developing the annual budget. So that is a really important step in tracking revenue and expenses. And remember, your budget is your plan for the year. It's your best estimate of what funds are going to come in and what's going to be spent. Dr. Palmer already touched on, you know, involving various staff in developing your budget. It helps create buy-in and ownership of the organization's finances. And this budget will just help you get a full picture of the organization's needs. So this is one of the samples that we have in your packet. But also, Leslie, do you have the one that is the center's proposed budget? So it's just an example. Yeah, there we go. Thank you.
Yep.
Um, so this is just an example, again, specific to the center of what we would do. We're actually in our budgeting process right now with our staff of what we would present to our staff and our board to get approval for this budget before the next fiscal year starts. And so part of our process is to look at you can see in this example, this is a budget that would be for year 23-24. And so in preparing this, we're including our approved budget for the current year we're in, which is 22-23, which is that first column that you're going to see there. And then because we're working on this before the year officially ends, we don't have actual revenue and expense for the year that we're in. So we do some estimations of what we think our year will end as. So that's where you see in the second column our estimated year end for 22-23. And then to me, it's always helpful to have a variance so that you can clearly see the difference in this case between what you budgeted for foundations, what you think is going to come in, and what that difference is for the year, because it helps you at any point have an idea of what's left to raise. Or in some cases, maybe where you were able to do a little bit better than you anticipated. And then the last column there is going to be our proposed budget for the next year. And so these are just some of the pieces that help us develop our budget for the new fiscal year. We also look at trends. We try to account for increases, particularly in expenses year over year, and can account for sort of regular expenses that we know are going to be happening. If you have an office lease or something like that, you know that's a pretty fixed expense. In addition to what we do here is, and I don't think we have a sample to share with you, but we also give our board budget notes in a separate document. And this is just a narrative that details what are included in these various revenue and expense line items. Sometimes we include an increase or decrease year over year, and we explain what's happening there because we really want our board to have a good understanding of what our budget is for the year, because that's part of their fiduciary responsibility, right? But just some examples here, and again, this will be different for everyone, but we've got some contributed revenue, sort of like we saw on the pie chart we just looked at for the center that can come from individuals, foundations, and corporations. We've got some earned revenue in our case, which is some sales of publications, some registration fees. The center has a jobs board, so those are all examples of earned revenue that can come in during the year. And then some typical expenses.
Tracy, can we go back up to the top for just a minute?
Sure.
I want to point out that there are 4 revenue streams here. There is a foundation revenue stream, there is a corporate revenue stream, there is an individual revenue stream, and then there's earned income and other. And so I want to point that out, that there are these different ways in which revenue is coming in. Pay attention to the earned income and other. That's a variety of ways in which dollars come into the organization. And so we could very practically do a pie chart just for earned income and other if we wanted to study that a little closer to maybe strategize around how to either increase that or change that in any way. Thank you for that. Thank you for the opportunity to share that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point, Dr. Palmer. And then I was just going to talk a little bit about expenses. So some typical expenses might be equipment. So that could be computers, laptops, things like that, that your staff needs. Mailing, postage, if you have a PO box, your office space, travel. So if you've got staff that are going out and about in the community. You'd have some travel expenses. And then, of course, I think probably for most organizations, the two biggest line items are typically going to be around salaries and wages. That's your staff, the people that you pay, and then payroll taxes and benefits that you're offering those folks. And then just to sort of again pick up on what Dr. Palmer was saying about the different types of revenue, this is the pretty version of what our board gets. We also have a very detailed spreadsheet of how we came up with these numbers because we really want to understand what is going into equipment for the year so that we're trying to plan for the best of our ability. It doesn't mean it's going to exactly happen the way that we think. In fact, we often have to do some tracking around, what sort of different that's happening throughout the year, because as I mentioned, this is your best estimate and your plan for the year. So you're not always going to be 100% right, and that's okay.
Okay.
Tracy,
Thank
can
you.
I ask a question?
Sure.
Thanks. This is Melanie. I think I'm new to this, so forgive the elementary question here. I guess I'm looking at the variance column and just trying to understand it. For example, in the section on expenses, when you have consultants,
Mhm.
correct me if I'm wrong. So the first figure is 211, which is basically the forecast. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. And then the 175 is the actual,
Mhm.
and the
Yes.
variance is a difference. So the 208 then is that, can you give us a summary? The 208 is what we need?
Yeah. Yeah, no, good. Thanks for asking this clarifying question. So the 208 in this case, the number that you see in blue in that last column, is what we're forecasting for the next fiscal year. So what we've shown you with the 211 is what our budget was for the current year that we were in. And then the 175 is what we think will be our expense for the current year that we're in. And then the 208 again is what we think we'll need for the next year. And so we just find with our board that it's important and helpful to remind them of the current year's budget and the current expense for that line item because it can play a part in helping them understand or prompt them to ask questions about, okay, well, you were only at 175, now you're projecting 208. So talk to me about, what some of those differences are. So that's what that last number is.
Okay, thank you
Does
so
that
much.
answer your question?
It does. Yeah, I guess I'm just looking at the line on mailing, for example. It looks like this may be what you referred to earlier, 11,550, and then 4,750, which is really different. And it
Yes.
sounds like that's the snapshot of the point in the year that one is in.
Yes, yes. And again, at this point, we didn't know exactly what our final number was going to be for the year. And so this was some more estimating of what I thought was going to happen for the remaining months. In this case, we just didn't use as much in postage as we originally thought. And you can sort of tell that when we look at that 9,625 number, that's lower than the current year. And so, something was happening there that made us adjust to be lower than we had budgeted previously, but a little bit more than what our actuals were. And so that's where those numbers sort of in the background come into play because I can go in and tell you exactly what makes up that 9,625 number. Maybe we were going to do an extra postcard around our conference or something like that.
Great. Thanks so much. I think my last question is just what time of year? I think you'll probably get into this already later maybe, but what time of year is a great time of year to start the budget? For example, what time of year did you take this snapshot in, whereby you would want to get the board to approve it so that you'd had time? Does it depend on the events or the programming events of the organization?
Yeah, I mean, what I would recommend is first of all, you have to think about what is your organization's fiscal year. So the centers is July 1 to June 30. So typically, when we are preparing our budget, we're thinking about we have a board that meets quarterly. And their last board meeting of our fiscal year would be in June. And so we are working on this March, April, May, sort of leading up to that board meeting and leading up to the start of that next fiscal year, because we want to have an approved budget before we start our new fiscal year. So I think it's going to depend on a few different things for your organization. So when your fiscal year is, how often and when your board meets. But I find it takes us a couple of months to do this process. So for example, Lisa and her team are working on the budget for our training and events for the year. And so they work on that, and that filters into this overall organizational budget. And so you have to allow your team time to be able to do that.
Great. Thanks for answering all the
Yeah.
questions.
Courtney, I see your hand, Courtney.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I
I
think
just
we have
wanted to
some
ask
questions.
a question about the narrative that you give to the board. So along with this spreadsheet, which I understand, you were saying that you give a narrative, and I was wondering if you could show an example of that or talk more about it, or any other supporting documents that go with your budget for your board.
Yeah, so team, in your wraparound, if it's okay, we could attach the budget notes that would go along with this example that they're looking at, so that they can actually see a little bit better what I'm referring to. But let me try and give an example. So let's take the salaries and wages line, for example. So we're saying that we're going to need $1,266,000 for salaries and wages for our upcoming fiscal year. So in the narrative document I was referring to, we would explain that that number is for 14 staff of the center for their salaries for the full year. It would explain if we were trying to do a cost of living increase for those staff and how much that is. It would explain if there are any new positions that we would want to include. So things like that. So it's just a narrative of giving them a little bit more context behind what these numbers are. Does that help a little bit without having that example in front of you, Courtney?
Yeah, it does. I was just hoping the wraparound to have that example would be great. Just because I want to start having that narrative within the
Yeah.
board. I think that that's a really important addition. And then I was just yeah, that would be perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Another
The other,
thing. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Dr. Palmer.
I would also add to that your bookkeeper, your finance person, whoever that is your, I would suggest that that be your go-to for you to talk about, how do I enhance the way in which we budget? Or how do I enhance the way in which we manage finances? Because every organization is going to be different, and any feedback that we give is going to be general and in alignment with our examples, and it may not necessarily speak to your organization. So I want everyone to really understand that the feedback that we're giving as we're going through this material in particular and the financial documents, every organization is different. If you don't write anything in your notes, write that. And your primary resource for being informed, educated, trained on your organization is your bookkeeper, your CPA, or whoever is managing your finances.
Yeah, absolutely. Really great point, Dr. Palmer. Yep. This is definitely in the context of what the center does, and we're probably a very different organization than what most of you represent on the call.
Um, I'm sorry,
Sorry,
Tracy, I'm gonna move us to away from budget, because we've got 4 more documents that we're gonna give an overview for. Lisa, I think you were about to say something, and if we could, team, go ahead and put the link in the chat for the financial position, activities, cash flows, functional expenses. If folks don't have that yet, and get ready to populate that on the screen so Tracy can take us through those 4 documents. I'm sorry, Lisa, go ahead.
I was just going to mention, I know we had a couple of questions in the chat for Tracy, but we'll go to her afterwards and put them in a wraparound since we're short on time.
All right. Is there anything that we can address while we're switching up?
One, Tracy, is will you discuss capitalizing expenses and what that means? And the other one is, are board members' contributions included in the budget? Oh, I
Yeah,
see.
and I'll
Oh, you
also try
answered
to,
that one. I saw that.
yeah, I'll try to
Mhm.
answer some of these as we go to, especially when Dr. Palmer has the microphone. But we're not going to get into the details of capitalizing expenses. I think that we've just got so much information to share. But you know, if you've got some follow-up questions to that, I can certainly try to answer those offline, separate from this. And then I did drop an answer in about the board members' contributions. For us, we include that in our individual contributions. So that's where that would show up.
Okay. All right. So we're going to, team, if we could go ahead and scroll up. And if we could go to our first document is the statement of financial position. Looks like that's on page 3 and 4. And so, Tracy, if you could provide some highlights to this statement.
Absolutely. So what you're looking at here is an organization's audited financials. And so these are statements that have been audited by an outside CPA for Big Brothers Big Sisters of Massachusetts Bay. These are public on their website, which is where we got them from to be able to share them. So I'm just going to quickly walk through some of the highlights of the different types of statements we're looking at. So the first one that's on your screen is the statements of financial position. You may have heard this be referred to as the balance sheet. This statement is going to show you assets, which is what you own, liabilities, which is what you owe to others, and then your net assets. And these are arranged in the order of liquidity. And what I mean by that is you can see current assets, versus a longer term asset. So that has to do with the amount of time for those assets and liabilities. So just quickly, some examples you see here. Cash, those are your bank accounts. Wherever you have your main operating account for your organization, that money's getting deposited into and being taken out of. Grants receivable. So this would be if you have a grant award from an organ or a foundation or a corporation that you have yet to receive, it would show up as a receivable for grants receivable. Prepaid expenses. So an example of this is health insurance premium. So typically insurance carriers bill you a month in advance. And so this would be a prepaid expense. And so that's just an example of that. Again, this is very specific to Big Brothers, Big Sisters. So you may not see these types of things on your financial statement. And then property and equipment is also another type of asset. So all the equipment, if you own a building, if you own vehicles, those things would be listed here. Leslie, you can scroll down to the second or the bottom half of this statement. Yeah, keep going down to liabilities and accounts payables. So this is the other half of the statement. Remember, the liabilities is what you owe. And so this can include things, accounts payables are bills that you have gotten for vendors for various services. So maybe it's a telephone bill. That is what you owe to them, would show up in accounts payable. You may have lease obligations like your office space. So you may sign a 2-year lease, and obviously you have a monthly requirement to that. But that's an example of a lease that might show up as a liability. And then these liabilities can be current or long-term. So current would be less than 6 months. Long term would be something that goes out longer than 6 months, like an office lease, for example. And then net assets, that's what would be left over if you sold all your assets and you paid all your debts or liabilities. So your net assets equals your total assets minus your total liabilities. And on this statement, these net assets are split into with and without donor restrictions. And so Dr. Palmer was talking about restricted revenue as we were looking at that pie chart, which just means that you've gotten money that is restricted for a program versus general operating funds that are coming in that are not restricted. You can spend it however the organization needs it. I think that is it for
Tracy, I do want to reply. Someone is asking for a it looks like a glossary of some sort. And we do not provide that with this training. However, what I will do, there is a resource that I like. It's a book that I refer to. It's called Financial Management. I will share that with the team and we'll provide that in the wraparound. So we don't have a Cliff Note resource that we provide as it relates to what we're sharing here today.
Thanks, Dr. Palmer.
Uh-huh.
Sorry, you all, I know this is a lot and we're moving quickly, but we're going to keep trucking along. So the next statement is the statements of activities, or you may have heard it referred to as the income statement or the profit and loss statement. So the purpose of this statement is to provide information about the organization's transactions and how those transactions help further the organization's mission through various initiatives and programs. So this statement is going to show your revenue and expense over time. It's your cash coming in and your cash going out. It categorizes the different revenue and expenses you can see here. And these revenue and expense line items should tie closely to your budget. So that budget document we just looked at. And then the expenses will also tie back to your budget. But on this financial statement, you'll see they're broken down by program or support service area. So you can see program services. So that's going to be the amount of expenses that is going directly to the programs that your nonprofit is offering. And then again, Leslie, you might have to scroll down just a little bit, but this statement also separates revenue into with or without donor restrictions. Actually, those are by columns on this one. So restricted revenue, again, just means that revenue has to be used for a specific purpose or programming. And then your change in net assets that would be shown on this schedule is just expenses subtracted from the revenue for the year. So essentially it's showing you if you have enough revenue to cover your expenses for the year. We can, if there's no other comments, then we can keep scrolling down to the statement of functional expense. So this is going to show the classification of your expenses as we were talking about, whether it's a program expense or an administrative or a fundraising expense. And so you can see this organization has broken down all their expense line items in that way. And this will tie back to the statement activities that we were just looking at. Program services in general are going to include expenses that meet the mission of your organizations through programs and services, whether it's directly or indirectly tied to those. Your support services include general and administrative. You might have heard it, operating expenses, overhead, and then fundraising and development expenses. The way you go about preparing this is there are different methods to allocate these expenses. So obviously you have an expense that's tied directly to a program. It's going to have that natural place within program services. But you can also look at salaries and figure out how those spread across programs versus administration and versus fundraising. And there are different methods to do that. I think the key is just to ensure that it's reasonable for your organization. If groups file a 990, which we're going to talk about later, this is a schedule that is needed for your 990. And so many organizations include it in their audited financial statements like you see here. And then do we have the statement of cash flow? I think.
Oh, yeah, that was just,
There
we
we
go.
go.
There it is.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So this will be the last one before we move on. But your statement of cash flow is going to provide information regarding the cash flows from various activities like operations and investments. It's going to summarize your movement of cash that's coming in and out. So again, where it come from and how it's being spent. Oftentimes, and I think you've seen this on all the other statements, but I'll point it out here. There'll be year-over-year comparison. So in this case, you can see the current year, which would be 2019, and the previous year, which is 2018. And this statement is just really quickly broken up into operating activities, which are activities from cash and operations or programs and services, investment activities, which would be purchases or sales of assets or loans that were made or received. And then financing activities would include cash movement from financing, leases, credit cards, that sort of thing. And so this is just going to show you the change in cash over the year.
Thank you. Thank you, Tracy. If we could go back to the gallery view, we're going to go into another financial document that's pertinent for us. Team, is it possible to show on the screen the financial management handout that has all the links to it? I just want to make sure everybody is in lockstep with where we are. So if you could just show that, I just want to point out where we are. So this was put in the chat for you. So if you don't have access to this, let's repost it in the chat and let's make sure everybody has it. So where you want to go now is you want to go to the very top where it says financial transactions. If you can pull up that site, we're using a real life organization as an example, and they do a really good job of showing all of their information posted. So here is their site. Here is their impact reports. You can keep going. Here's their impact reports all the way from 2014. And then you also will see their audited financials. That's the document that Tracy was speaking from a few minutes ago. They've got every audited financial packet from 2014 up until the present. And then keep going, thank you. The 990, which is where we're gonna go next. So I just want you to know what you have at your disposal. Quite often 501c3s will be real transparent and accountable, and they will post all of this information for the public to review. And especially if you're out fundraising and you're trying to get some significant donors to give a significant, I say significant, to contribute money to your agency. Now take me back to the document, the financial management document. So what Tracy has walked us through so far is financial transactions is at the top. That's the website where you can find all of this information. She shared the budget for the center. We put that in the chat. And then we also gave you a sample. And you have this sheet, so you can click on these and you can access the information. The reports and presentations, Tracy just went through all four of those statements and explained those statements to us. Now what she's going to do is she's going to highlight the 990, which is another financial document that nonprofits have to submit to the Internal Revenue every year. And she's also, we're going to pull up the annual report and she's going to speak to that as well. The audit and the auditor's report, we've already done that. That took place up top. So I just want us to know what it is that you have at your disposal as it relates to what we're talking about. So let's go back to the gallery for a moment. Thank you, team, for doing that. We all good? You know, I gotta lay eyes on you. I gotta make sure you're okay, because we're rocking and rolling. We got quite a bit of information for you. And we know that the learning curve sometimes is not as narrow when it comes to financial management, which is why I encourage you to spend time with your bookkeeper, to spend time with your CPA, and try to better understand how all is being managed with your nonprofit organization specifically. The 990 is the next financial document that Tracy is going to highlight for us. Your organization should be filing its 990 every year, so you should be able to take a look at your own 990 document. And Tracy, I'm going to turn it back over to you, and team, you can pull up the 990.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Palmer. So this is going to be another sort of high-level overview. If you've looked at a 990 or worked on one before, you know there are a lot of different schedules that can go along with it. But as Dr. Palmer said, this is a nonprofit organization's tax document that needs to be filed annually. It's due the 15th day of the 5th month after the end of your fiscal year. So if you have a June 30 year end, then this would be due November 15th, 15 days after the 5th month. There are different types of 990 forms, sort of like individual tax forms that we all fill out. So there's the standard form 990, which is what's on your screen. There is also an easy form, and then a 990N, which is a postcard. And which one your organization needs to complete depends on your gross receipts for the year. In another important thing to lift up before we get into sort of the summary page of this document is that back in 2019, there was a mandate for versions of the 990 to be required to be filed electronically through an authorized IRS provider. And so we just lift that up, one, so that you all know, and also just to recognize that this can be burdensome and even costly for some nonprofit organizations because it's required that you have to do it that way. So just wanted to share that bit of information. The other thing about 990s is they are required to be open to public inspection, and you need to provide it if it is requested. As we were just looking at the website, you know, they're transparent and they're showing these for the general public. And you could have various entities that are going to be looking at your organization's 990. It could be a donor or funder or a partner. And then I think there is an opportunity on the 990 for the organization to tell their story and accomplishments. So there's a section that's called Program Service Accomplishments. Again, it's a narrative where you can say, we helped this many people by doing, you know, serving this program. And so you really can use it as a way to highlight yourself. Again, as a public document, you all should take advantage of being able to do that. Your board should review this prior to filing. There is a question on here that actually asks that under the compliance section. But what you're looking at is just the main form 990. And Leslie, you can kind of scroll as I'm speaking, and I'm not going to speak too much to these specific sections of it, but you can see there's a summary of financial information here. There is this is the first page. If you keep going, there is a checklist of required schedules. This program service accomplishments is where I was talking about. You can use it to tell your nonprofit story and what you accomplished for the year. There's also a section on tax compliance, on governance, which includes questions about your board, your governing documents, your committees. There is a policy section which asks, do you have particular policies like a whistleblower policy, a document retention and destruction policy, and then various compensation policies? So again, we could do a whole nother class just on this initial part of the 990. So we're not going to go into that much detail, but we wanted to give you a few highlights about the importance of this form. We could, if there's nothing else about that, I believe we were going to go to the annual report next, Dr. Palmer.
Yeah. Yes, and some of your organizations may be referring to, you may refer to the annual report now as the impact report. I know there's been a little bit of jargon change with that. Not sure where that originated, but over the past 5 years or so, we've now started naming our annual report as the impact report. And so we're pulling up a sample. Again, this is on the website that we provided with you, but we just want to highlight this. And also, we are expected to develop an annual report or impact report each and every year. Thank you.
Yeah, just a couple of other things on this. Typically, nonprofits will post this on their website again for the general public to see. It's going to highlight again your impact for the year, your accomplishments. It's a great place to be able to thank your donors or partners. Within that, you can include both financial and programmatic data or information. So you can highlight, where your funds came from, how they were used, the impacts of your programs over the year. And then I also encourage you to think strategically about how you can share this within your organization, which will be a little different for each of us. But who do you want to get this in front of so that they can see all the great work that your nonprofit has done over the year? Dr. Palmer, I don't know if there's anything else you want to highlight specifically about this.
Nope, I'm good. Thank you so much.
All right.
Okay. The next item we have is on page in your workbooks. If we could go back to the gallery view. In your workbooks on page 104 is what is identified as the generally accepted accounting principles. Tracy, I'll let you speak to that.
Okay.
info.
Yeah, so the sometimes it's referred to as GAAP. It's issued by FASB, another acronym, but as Dr. Palmer said, it's General Accepting Accounting Principles, which is just a common set of accounting rules and requirements, which is issued by the Financial Accounting Standards Board. And it's just to standardize procedures used in various accounting industries, which includes the nonprofit industry. They do this to be able to provide clear, consistent, comparable information on financials. And these accounting practices are required by nonprofits to ensure that financial information is reported consistently and accurately. So you need to be making sure that you're following these general accepted accounting principles as you develop and prepare your financials.
Thank you. If we could go to slide 18. So the next part of information that we want to share are internal controls and audit. Now, Tracy has already gone over an audit packet, meaning once the audit is complete, what you receive. So that we've already completed, but we're going to just kind of list out, Tracy, here. And if you could just give some points about internal controls and the audit.
Yeah, so internal controls are again financial management guidelines and policies, which we started off talking about. They are going to be different for all organizations, but internal controls specifically are practices that are put into place and designed to prevent misuse, misappropriation, fraud, that sort of thing. So they allow you to create some checks and balances on staff and board members. I'll just give you a quick example. And again, this is just specific for the center. But we have one person who opens the mail, and then we have a separate person who would make the deposit. And then we have another person who actually is recording that deposit within our accounting system. And so that would be an example of an internal control. If you're a smaller organization, you can get a little creative around who manages those tasks. But the point is to keep that separation of duties, again, to prevent any misuse or any fraud. Do you want me to mention the financial review?
Sure.
Dr. Palmer?
Yep.
Yeah, so
Yep. I think, yeah, because some can't necessarily afford the full audit. Yep.
right. So if your organization doesn't have an audit, whether it's because of cost or maybe that level of detail is just not needed for your organization, there is something called a financial review. That is on a smaller scale, but it can test those internal controls. It can look at your bylaws to see how those are documented. And so it's more of a review or an overview of an organization's financials without getting into some of the detailed testing that comes along when you go through an audit.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I think that kind of concludes this part of our financial management or this part of our session today as far as it relates to financial management. Tracy, do you have any just kind of closing comments that you would like to share with the class today? And if we could go back to the gallery view, that would be great.
I mean, I think just reiterating what you've said a few times already, Dr. Palmer, is know who your resource is in terms of if you're lucky enough to have financial staff, or if you have an outside bookkeeper, CPA. In some cases, it could be your treasurer. Use these resources to help you develop these things. Ask questions. I always am happy to hear from board members that they'd like to see something in a different way, because I think that can help folks understand things differently. So yeah, and just know that none of this happens overnight. It takes time to get there. And like we've said several times already, that it really can be different for each organization. But I think there are some basics that we've covered today that you all want to make sure that's happening within your organization.
All right. Thank you, Tracy, for being with us
Thanks for having me.
as it relates to this part of our work. I know you all are like, my goodness, what in the world? For those of you who are a little bit more seasoned in your roles with your nonprofits, that may not be the case for you. But hopefully there were some things that, even if you are seasoned, that Tracy was able to highlight that might have informed you in a unique and different way. So again, thank you, Tracy, for helping us with our financial management topic. We are going to move into fundraising. We are going to take a break before we do that, however. So team, if we could could we share slide 19? So we started our day off. We started this session off today with an image and looking at what the long-term goal is when you are managing your finances and studying and reviewing and projecting and trying to grow in that way. And then we're going to now move into fundraising. What we're showing you here is that pie chart again, but what we're highlighting are the ways in which revenue has been diversified here. So, or ways that we could potentially diversify. Fundraising, our perspective is fundraising and grant writing are two different things. Fundraising is securing contributions, unrestricted dollars. We're going to talk about that. And then we could also offer or request a fee for services that we offer. We can write grants. We might enter into contracts to provide a particular service. We might also have grown to the point where we have an investment portfolio. And then we may have also grown to the point where we have endowments. So when we're thinking about diversification of revenue, these are kind of those umbrella areas that we can begin to do work in if in alignment with the way our nonprofit works. So closing out financial management, moving into fundraising, fundraising being one of those revenue streams. And of course, there are multiple layers to fundraising. And so we're going to take a break. If we could go back to gallery, it is 11:19. So we're going to come back at 11. What time, team, do we want to come back? Do we want a 10-minute break or do we want a 5-minute break? What do we want to go? We want to come back at 11:30?
That sounds good.
All right, all right. So
Okay.
we will start promptly back at 11:30, and we've got a wealth of information to cover as it relates to fundraising. Thank you all. Page 106 to page 124. That's where the fundraising material is in your workbooks. So what we're going to begin with, and we're going to begin with the fundraising stages as it relates to fundraising. But let me make a few comments here in the gallery before we kind of share our screen a little bit here. So in terms of fundraising, quite often, whenever we're asked questions about fundraising, seemingly there's sometimes this sense that there's this magic recipe that we can give that's going to help all of our organizations raise all the money that we need to raise. And what I will say is that each of our nonprofit organizations should have some level, some degree of a fundraising plan. So before you even get into the how to do it, there should be some thought put into working over a 12-month period of time and looking at how we can fundraise over the course of the fiscal year. So we don't just fundraise, and we shouldn't be thinking about it as this one-time thing that we do. We should have a master plan on how we are going to raise money and to bring into our organization. Team, and by the way, I did put in the chat the link to that financial management book. I think I put it to everyone, and I think Rebecca, I sent it to you. So I tried to do it both. I tried to do it both ways. So I hope you all received it. Sorry, I had was reminded that I wanted you all to have that. That's a resource I've used for years. That author, Charles Coe, C-O-E. I like the way he breaks it all down for you. So anyway, fundraising. So we should have a 12-month work plan. Like we should be engaged in fundraising throughout the year. We should have, as a part of that, we should have a time period during the year where we are campaigning, annual campaigning for unrestricted dollars to come into our organization through contributions. That looks different for every organization, but just real high level, that's just fundamental. And then as you grow as a 501c3, as a charity, then you can expand and enhance what you do in that plan. And so it should be that you have a certain time of the year where you have different ways that you're asking us to give to your nonprofit organization. Most of you probably do an appeal letter at the end of the year. Most do it around November. You have a database of individuals that you can send that out to, individuals that have given before, individuals that you're prospecting, new people that you're hoping to give. You know, so you have that annual ask that you're doing. Most people send some type of an appeal letter in that way, but there should be, if not combined with that, there should be a 2 to 3, 4 month period of time where you are asking for donations to contribute to that budget that Tracy talked about. You have an annual budget, you know what the budget is. Now you're trying to fundraise to meet the expenses in the budget. So those things should go together. So that's kind of the way in which we should be thinking about fundraising, and not just as a golf tournament, or not just as a luncheon, or not just as a gala, or not just as whatever it is that you decide is going to be your annual kind of way of getting people to contribute. So I want to say that at the onset, that's where we need to be and how we need to be thinking. Team, if we could go to slide 23. So the stages of fundraising, and here what we're focusing on is we are focusing on identifying new prospects to become individual donors. So the fundraising stages, that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about identifying individual donors to become routine donors of our nonprofit organization. And then cultivation, solicitation, stewardship. We should be putting as much emphasis and time into individual giving, receiving individual donations as we do into grant writing, if not more. And so we want to make sure that we reiterate that. Being consistent and frequently asking our donor base for a contribution is very important. It's very important. And so it's tough. It's not easy, but it is very, very important. So that is kind of where we are as it relates to that. Identification. So let's go to that. We're going to do some hands-on work. And team, if you could just capture the questions in the chat, and I'll try to pause here in different places to respond to that. But I do want to get through the material that we have planned for this topic. So identification in terms of prospects, because what the question that we get a lot is, well, how do I build a donor base? Like, how do I build a directory, a database of donors? How do I do that? And so we want to start with the identification of donor prospects. We could go to the next slide. And then we want to talk about research here. And so we're going to use, if you go to page, get my pages, 111. If we go to page 111 and 112, what we want to point out here is we want to point out how we can generate a prospect or a master donor prospect list. That's what we want to work on. How do we generate a master donor prospect list? Now, if you already have a donor base, we're talking about how do we add to that? And we'll talk about how to maintain it too, but how do we add to that? So if you look at page 111, and you're going to need something to write with as well. And then we're going to go into a breakout to do a little bit more work with this. So we want to, what we're trying to do is we're trying to create a donor prospect list, or a master list. And so what I want you to do is, first of all, does everybody have page 111? Because I don't want to go faster than we need to. Take me back to gallery because I can't see everybody. So I want to be able to see if you all don't mind. All right, I see some thumbs up and so on. So we're going to generate a master donor prospect list. And so on your list, we're going to start with the first column. And what I want you to list there is I want you to list 15 people that you know. Don't think about it long and hard, just 15 people that you know. Some people we know better than others, but if for this exercise, this is 15 people that you know. Just list their names, first name, real quick. Who do you know? $15 people that we know. Are we on number 10? Should be on number 10. Just 15 people that you know. Okay. In the next column, we want you to put a check mark by the individuals that you put in that first column, a check mark by the individuals who believe in the mission and the vision of the nonprofit you're representing here today. So you've got the 15. Now we're going through and we're identifying, we're putting a check mark by the individuals who believe in the cause, the mission or vision of the nonprofit that you represent here today. So we got our 15 people. And now we're going to put a check mark by all of those folks that we think believe in what we believe in by way of our representation of the nonprofit that we work with. The next column is of those individuals that believe in our mission and our vision. We want you to put a check mark by those individuals that you know make donations to other things. Like you know for a fact that they give to their church or they give to another nonprofit or even that they have communicated or indicated that in some way they would be willing to give. So you want to indicate that by checking those individuals. Now, hopefully, all 15 believe in your cause and your mission, and all 15 will be willing to give money to such a thing, or that they have a practice of giving, or in some form that is the case. Of those individuals that you say, I know them, they believe in our mission and our vision, they give money, they contribute, they are giving people. If you were to ask them for a donation, and let's just say for all practical purposes, we're all with the same nonprofit, right? We're all with the same nonprofit, hypothetically. And we're raising $1 million. There are 51 of us on this call today, 51. And we're trying to raise $1 million. How much would you ask them to contribute towards that million? Or how much do you think, just your gut, that they would be willing to give towards this mission or cause that they also believe in? They have demonstrated a spirit of giving, or you know that they give money away. What would that amount be if you asked to give? Now, remember, this is an exercise for skill building. So we want to make sure that we get the skill of it in terms of what we're trying to do here. And I'm just going to pause there and let you complete that worksheet. The next thing we're gonna do is I want you to add up that total amount. So that amount you're gonna ask, that column, I want you to add up that total amount. And then I also want you to add up the number of people. So you should end up with number of people, total amount. Number of people, total amount. And we're gonna go in a breakout for about 7 minutes. Now, listen to me, 7 minutes. So before you go in the breakout, make sure you have the total number of individuals that you're gonna ask, and you have the total number of how much that equals, or total amount of how much that equals before you go in the breakout. So I'm going to pause here to make sure we all have that information before we go into breakout, because we want you to do something with that information. All right. So we're going to have our information ready. Okay. When you go into the breakout, you are going to be completing a master prospect list. You're going to be completing a master prospect list when you go into breakout. I promise you, we're in the home stretch. I know I got you thinking about math. You got to add up numbers. It's almost lunchtime. Some of you didn't have breakfast. I get it, but we're gonna get to the end here. So we're going to go into our breakouts and we're going to create a master prospect list. Okay. So when you go in, let's have a person that's gonna, kind of be keeping up. So go to page 112. When you go into your breakout, you are going to be building a master prospect list. So you're going to bring over those individuals that you brought over that you said would give and how much you would ask. And you're going to build this prospect list. We're all going to list who those people are. We're going to list how much in the fourth column that we're going to ask them for, because you've already done that work. You've already done that. And then what we're going to do is you're going to indicate in the second and third column who's going to make that contact, and then who's actually going to ask for the gift. That's very important to remember when we come back into the larger space. So when you go into the breakout, you're going to have the total number of prospects. You're going to have that total dollar amount. Put that to the side. You're going to have that. And then what you're also going to have, what you're going to do is you're going to be providing who those prospects are, how we're going to contact them, what makes sense, and who's going to make the ask, and then the amount to be solicited. Are we good? Now, what happens when you go into breakout is things start to happen organically. So I know we've given you some instructions, but we want you to use the tool too, as it aligns with who you all are in that breakout. So we want you to transfer that information. Are we good? Yes? No? Let's transition Rebecca into our breakout.
All right. Up the rooms. And 10 minutes till enough time, you think?
Uh,
Based on our
let's do
timing?
about 7. I need those 3 minutes.
Yeah, I thought
So
so.
let's
Okay.
do about 7.
All right.
We're going to do 7 minutes, but we want you to go in and work with that master prospect list worksheet on page 112.
We'll see you back here in 7. And just a reminder, if at any time you have any questions or anything happens in a breakout room you need to share with us, feel free to come back into the main room. Thank you.
All right. So What we want to do is, we want to, and we know that we could have used more time. We understand. But what we want to do is we want to come back with, creating a master list, a master prospect list. And then I want to do some debriefing on the other side of Rebecca helping us to create this master list. So I asked you to identify the number of donors and that amount, correct? And so we are going to tally that. And then I want to move into some discussion about what happened in your breakout. So Rebecca, I'll let you take that.
Group one, who's our recorder who wants to give us our numbers?
So what was the total number of prospects?
Know what
when
group I
you,
was in. I'm sorry. I just joined the breakout and didn't look at the number.
Oh, that's
okay,
okay.
okay.
That's okay.
Sorry,
I
Tasha.
can find it if I pull up my breakouts. Yeah. I'll pull the breakout rooms up so I can tell. So for those of you that do know which group number you in, just let me know if you're a recorder and then we'll do it by process of elimination.
Kay was in group one.
Group one, you said?
Okay, thanks, Sierra. Okay, I need a moment to tally. We didn't get to that point yet.
Oh, that's okay.
Okay, all right.
How
I'm
about
working on it.
No worries. How about group two? It's like, oops. Okay.
So
Rebecca, we
let me
were
just,
group two. Uh-oh, sorry about that.
Yep. Jesselyn, go ahead.
Yes. Yeah, we were group two there. You ready for us?
Yep.
Okay, so we had a total of 69 prospects.
Oh, okay.
And then our total ask was $42,660.
Okay. Thank you. Any other groups that that got their tally?
So I don't know what group I was in. We didn't get to the tally piece of it. We got into some great conversation though about how we went about choosing the individuals that we would put on that list.
mhm.
Okay.
Can you hold that for me? And we're going to come back to that. Who was that speaking? Was that Miss Webb?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'm gonna come back to that, Miss Webb. And if we don't have numbers, I'm gonna put numbers in, Rebecca,
Okay. That
because we
sounds good.
want us to gain the skill.
Okay.
So if you have it, just go ahead and shout it out, whatever your total prospects and whatever the goal amount, if you've had a chance to do it.
I was tallying for group two at the very end very quickly, and I did make an error. So the correct amount for group two is actually 49,460. My apologies.
Thanks.
Thanks,
No, no
Mary.
worries. I love the fact that you all want to be absolutely correct for this exercise. I just love it. Love it, love it, love it. We got a group down here, 12 people, 11,300. It doesn't even matter where you put it, just as long as we've got our groups indicated.
That was actually room 4. We'll do
Uh-huh,
so we got
thank
12
you.
people and the total was 11,300.
Uh-huh. And you all know this happens for real when I do this with boards, when I do this exercise with a group of board members. The same kind of thing kind of happens in terms of just kind of getting it all together in terms of prospects and amount. Do we have another group that can add to the group one? 13 people, 13,350.
Okay. We'll take that one for group 6. Thanks for
Okay.
offering that up.
All
That's
right, thank
helpful.
you.
That's great.
Thank you all so much for
We'll
chiming
just
in
put some
here.
other numbers in here.
Okay, yep, that's
To
fine.
keep it
So,
moving along.
uh-huh.
Okay.
Right. So hopefully we've kind of gotten the gist of the exercise. It is for us to spend time with individuals who are willing to help us raise money. And with those individuals, we're having them to identify prospects. If we go back to page 111, we are going to identify people that we know, people, and then from that, check off people that believe in our mission, and determine whether or not, back to Ms. Webb's comment, kind of think about whether or not these folks are willing to give, or they do give, or there's some indication that you have, knowing them, that they would be willing to give. And then what would we think would be an ask for each of those individuals? Then you went into, so we did this individually. So if we were a staff, or we were a fundraising committee, or we were an entire board, we would do this individually. Then we would come together like you did in the breakout, and we would begin to share who these individuals are, because some of us may know the same people. And so we would begin to share who these people are and try to hone in on a credible list of prospects, of which we have here 161 prospects. And the amount that we're willing to ask for is $125,510. How many of your organizations could utilize $125,510 today? And how many of your organizations could benefit from increasing your donor base from maybe the one that you have to 162? Right? I mean, that's the theory. That's the theory. So when folks ask me questions like, well, we did pick up the question from the chat. Well, what do you do when the climate is such that we got economic challenges and, we don't know what to do? We do the same thing, right? But we do it related to the context of what's happening in the environment. So we could go through this same exercise, but then we add in there identification. We add in, well, what's the climate? These 10 people may have been a prospect if things were a little different in terms of what's happening. And let's just call it. Right now, we're dealing with a whole lot of political stuff. So there are some folks that we would approach prior to this that we might not, just because we're thinking they wouldn't be a prospect for what it is that we do. So I'm going to come back to that because I want to add more to a response to that question. 161 prospects, right? $125,000. How long did it take us to generate that prospect list? 7 minutes. 7 minutes. So now what we have to do, if you go to page 112, we generate, now we have a prospect of donors that we can put in a database that our organization has identified as individuals who would potentially give to our cause. On page 112, we got 161 prospects, not 15, right? We got 161. So we have to decide who's going to contact each one of them, who's going to reach out potentially and see if this is even a possibility. And then the other part is that who's going to really make the ask? Like who's going to go to make the ask? I might be the contact, but I might be bringing Miss Webb, and I might be bringing Mary Beth, and I might be bringing Blake. I'm looking at the people I can see. I might be bringing those individuals with me to solicit the gift. I may not necessarily go and solicit the gift all on my own. So that's important to keep in mind. Ms. Webb, can you talk about choosing the individual? Can you give voice to that? You were going to share that earlier.
Yeah, so our group, we had kind of a variety of different leaders who had different experiences or years in the business. And my first jump was, well, let me look at people who have come to special events, or people who have come to take a tour of our facility, or people who have shown an interest in what we do, that those are some individuals. And then it was brought up that maybe, should we choose personal contacts, people that we know? And I personally shared that before I was an executive director, I was on the board of directors for an extended period of time. And that early on, we were asked to provide the names and contact information for 10, 15 personal contacts of ours. And I remember being horrified that, I didn't hang out with friends who would be able to make a contribution of sorts. And we did a direct mail campaign. And I was shocked to find out that those 10 or 15 people, just because they knew who I was and what the agency meant to me, that they still 20 years later will write $100 check annually over that period of time. So in addition to personal contacts and professional contacts, don't overlook folks that you just make assumptions might not write a check. So
because the key is to ask. That's the key. The key is to make the ask and identify who's gonna ask. Is there anybody else who has a comment about your breakout and kind of what you discussed around trying to build this master prospect list? Listen, y'all, we have 161 prospects here.
Yes,
Dr.
ma'am.
Uh-huh. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I mean, yeah, the piggyback on Miss Webb was talking about. One of the things that I try to do the best is understand a donor's culture, their environment, who it is, what they do, how it ties with me. Because a lot of people are just donating. I mean, real. Let's be honest. Donating to get that the tax exemption, and they're being real picky. But then you have those that are so passionate that they're looking for like-minded people. So identifying and understanding a culture and being in the environment that will give you those money is a major must for me. Like I said, you can't teach a lion to swim like a whale. You can't teach a whale to hunt like a black panther. Human beings are different. You have to be in the environment where you flourish. And if and one thing about I love being a nonprofit, I love being I care too much. I've had job after job, lost, fired so many times because I cared more than my supervisors who were above me at the time. So it's important to understand the environment. Piggyback on Ms. Webb was saying. I just had to say that. Thank you. Thank you, Doctor.
And on page 112, if you look at that last column on page 112, we can make notes about each one of our prospects. Now, this is what we have in our workbook. This is a practical way of doing it. Some of you are very sophisticated. You know how to use Excel. You know how to create workbooks. You know how to do all that. And so, jump to that. But you can generate and you can create information related to your prospects, and you can incorporate some of what Maurice is saying there. Something else Maurice pointed out, segmenting the prospects. So this 161 prospects that we have, some of these folks are giving out of passion and compassion for what we do. And some of these folks might be giving as a result of some perk that they get on the other side of the giving. And so what we have to do is identify, why would Pamela Palmer give to my cause? Or what is it that would prompt her? Or what is it about her? All those things are relevant because we want to make sure that we have the person who aligns best to make the ask. And so that's important to remember. So I wanted to point out that segmentation. Team, if we could go to slide 25. So that's identification. Now we're talking about cultivating the prospects. We want to move from being on the prospect list to a new donor. And so this cultivation could be from new prospects. It could also be existing donors because we have to maintain those relationships. It could also be that we have our donor base or our current database, and we want to grow that, expand that. We want to make sure we got accurate information included in there about all of our prospects and existing donors. It is important for us to study and analyze that information and data that we have. If we're looking at existing donors, then we're looking at the donors and their giving patterns. How frequent, how often, what for? Because we want to continue to cultivate and grow that relationship. And we might even want to upgrade. So we're analyzing the donor giving. We're not just putting information in a database system or a CRM, some of you may have. We're not just putting it in there, leaving it there, and nobody's studying it or reviewing it or looking at the information. And we're communicating with those donors as appropriate. So that's important to remember. In your workbook, go to page 113 and 114. Go to page 113 and 114. We've put in here some nuggets or some notes, I should say, not nuggets. People rules of fundraising, and then also donor bill of rights. So these are resources that if we're going to be really active and intentional and maybe enhance the way our bringing on donors to give, these are some pieces of information that would be helpful to you in terms of thinking about approaching donors and then also potentially trying to upgrade our donors in our donor base. Also in terms of database systems. Team, if you could put in the chat our list of examples of what some of those donor systems are. So some folks are using Excel spreadsheet, Excel as a place to store donor information. Some use platforms like Salesforce, Bloomerang, Donor Perfect, HubSpot, Network for Good, Little Green Light. We're going to put these in the chat, and then we also will share this in the wraparound. But there are, database systems that we can subscribe to that might be helpful. It depends on what works best for your organization. I have heard pros and cons to all of these different opportunities for databases. Accessibility, affordability. Affordability. When it comes to databases, oftentimes that's what's important. And then what is our comfort level to use that database? What is our comfort level to use that database? So we got the prospect, we got the master prospect list, and now we're going to cultivate those prospects. Solicitation, you can go ahead to the next slide. So we're going to solicit, we're going to make the ask. And that differs from who we are asking, and we talked about that. So we want to get to know as best we can by way of the person who shared the prospect. We want to get to know them, and we want to be appropriate in how we ask. Some people we can call them. Some people we can send a letter. Some people we can take to coffee. Some people we can invite to our premises to look at our organization and our programs and services. So it depends. Once we make that ask, then we have to maintain donor relationships. That's important. Once we make the ask, we should maintain relationship, whether it is communicating on an annual basis, or whether it is some individuals like to show up and volunteer and participate. And so minimally, we should be doing some form of an annual ask or an annual appeal, minimally, in terms of really kind of getting your fundraising plan and apparatus off the ground. Once we make the solicitation, we have to steward the gift. the donor. So we want to do stewardship. We can go to the next slide. So we want to pay attention to how they give. We want to recognize them if necessary. Some people don't want to be recognized, so we have to really pay attention to that. We want to get to know, again, we want to get to know our donors. So we want to communicate with them in ways that align with the way in which they prefer for us to communicate with them. Some folks are not, they're not savvy with their phones. They don't text. They don't, they don't use QR code. They don't, and so we have to be mindful of what that looks like and what that's all about. So make sure you connect with your donors before you acknowledge and recognize in the way in which you do that. Don't take it for granted that they want that to happen. So that's something that you can think about doing. So we want to make sure of that. You can go to the next slide, and some of our folks are chiming in the chat about how to do that, how to communicate with our donors. Some people still want to receive things by snail mail. Some folks are, again, savvy with social media in that way. And so, again, communicating with our donors is important. Donor giving. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about donor giving. Go in your workbook, and team, I think this is going to be the last item that I covered today, and we'll pick up for that very, very last item that's to come. Let's see. Go with me in your workbook to page, go to page 120, Pyramid of Giving. I want to point out what you have here. Go to the next slide. So in your workbook, if you look at page 120, you're going to see a resource titled Pyramid of Giving. And then when you go to page 121, you're going to see a written description of each of these 3 areas of giving as identified in the Pyramid of Giving. Any fundraising training that you participate in, or any learning that you reach out to try to engage in about fundraising, typically the Pyramid of Giving is going to be referenced or it's going to be explained. So here's the theory. The theory is that if we can establish in page 120, if we can establish an annual giving apparatus, be it that we are sending direct mail, we're having special events, we have an annual campaign. Typically, the theory is if we can establish some frequency and consistency with annual giving tools, then we can rise to the major giving and the estate giving. But the idea, page 120, is that if we can establish an annual giving plan, what are we doing over the course of our fiscal year to raise money by way of fundraising? The theory is if we can do that, then we can begin to approach major giving opportunities like corporate giving, like foundation giving. And then, of course, if there's some significant asset that we're trying to acquire, we can also engage in capital campaigns. Look at page 121. Annual giving, major giving, estate giving. And the idea is the pyramid is symbolic of if we can build a foundation of annual giving with some consistency and frequency and grow that to we're yielding contributions on a regular cycle and basis. Now, back to when it's challenging and the climate is challenging and there's uncertainty and we don't know where we don't know if we can use the same approaches that we have used in the past. And the climate right now is just like that. Then think about your organization from a scope and scale perspective. Think about that. Because maybe, I know we don't want to do it and we kind of don't like to hear it, but there are times when we look at the prospect of being able to bring in the amount of money that we need to meet our budget. Sometimes it calls for us to modify our programming and services from a scope and scale perspective. So I want us to kind of think about that when it comes to asking for donations in alignment with our budget. That's important. Page 122. Again, pyramid of giving. That's page 120. Types of giving. We've described that for you. And then some specific types of fundraising that aligns with that type of giving program. So we have 3 giving programs: annual giving, major giving, estate giving. And then on page 122, we've provided what it might look like to engage in annual giving, what it might look like to engage in major giving, and what estate giving is all about. Page 122. So page 120, 121, and 122, those pages go together. You know, they support each other. What are we doing? We are doing annual, major, or estate giving. And then how are we doing it? The different types of fundraising is the way in which we can go about that. And this is not a complete list. You might identify some other ways of giving as it relates to giving. Fund development strategies. So giving, pyramid of giving, types of giving programs, types of fundraising, fundamental. This slide here, when it comes to fundraising, this is the theoretical framework for it. And then the idea is to be consistent and frequent in the way, in the timing of how we approach giving. And some of you have probably already picked up on this if you didn't already know it before now. We're talking about sales. SALES, that's what we're talking about. We're selling our organization in ways that will generate contributions from donors. And then who helps us to do that? Go to the next slide. Who helps us to do that? Sometimes we have paid staff. Sometimes you can go to the next slide. Sometimes we have paid staff. Sometimes we have volunteers, and sometimes we have board of directors helping us, or it's eclectic. It's a combination of all. We're all asking. It's important for the messaging to be, we are all fundraisers, or we can all be fundraisers. And so we're all in a position to make an ask to bring funds in the door. I am gonna close with, this is our last topic for fundraising, but I wanna start with a recap of fundraising when we meet next week. So just kind of make sure that we make a note of that. I wanna do a little bit of a recap in that regard. Take us back to the gallery. I know. I already know. You don't even have to tell me. I already know what you're thinking. Whew. Oh, yes. Here's what I always say about fundraising. If we are not asking for donations, then we can do all the training in the universe and we still won't raise money. So we have to figure out what works best for each of our organizations in terms of asking for the donation. Again, we're gonna pick back up here on Tuesday because I wanna bring a little bit more closure to this particular management function. Also, we're gonna stay on after today like we normally do. There was a question in the chat that I'm gonna start off with as well next week. And that question was, let me get over to my notes. Rebecca, if you get to it before me, or Lisa. Oh, here we go. How do we implement the framework or the identification, cultivation, solicitation, stewardship? How do we do that in a time of economic challenges and funding disadvantages and shortages? So that was the question. So I think that's a good place to start when we get together next week. Rebecca, I think you're up.
Yeah. Nice job. And that's a good question. I think that'll be a good way to start off the last session. Thank you, Dr. Palmer, and everyone for hanging in there with us. Just a couple minutes for our closing real quick. I'm going to go ahead and put the evaluation link in the chat here. Thanks for taking that time. I know that sometimes these questions can get a little repetitive from week to week, but it allows us to compare week to week and see how things are going. So thank you for taking the time to complete those. We do review it every week as we prep for the next week's session. Reminder about that LinkedIn group. If you haven't joined, it's a great way to connect with people in this cohort and ask questions, share resources, articles, templates, all kinds of things. So please go ahead and request to join. Actually, I haven't checked in a while. I need to see if anybody's requested to join, and I can authorize their membership within that group. It is a closed group on LinkedIn. Also want to share, looks like I have a note here, also share our events calendar. We've got some trainings and things coming up. I know we've got a public policy conversation coming up in Charlotte on Monday, if you're interested in attending that. We've got a public policy and advocacy briefing with David Heinen coming up on Friday. That'll be virtual on federal policies affecting nonprofits. So that's another one you may want to check out. That link is in the chat as well. A lot of links I'm throwing at you here. Our next session will be next week. It'll be the final session on human resources and graduation. It's going to be a fun one. Let's go to the next slide and walk you through just some quick graduation prep. We do compile videos from you all if you're interested in being a part of that. We'll have instructions in the wraparound email, and then you'll get a link from this company called Montage. And it's just a way for us to compile all these videos from you all. It's a quick 20-30 seconds. You can answer one of the prompts that we have there. And then we compile them into a graduation video that we show on the last session. People have gotten really creative with them, which I encourage. I encourage you to get creative with it and to have fun with it. It's a way for you to just share what this series has meant to you, what you're taking forward, what you wish to your fellow cohort members. So that'll be coming your way. Please look for that email, and they'll send you a couple of reminders. We will have kind of a tight timeline. Typically, I'm asking folks to get their videos in. It shouldn't take you long. Just get your video in by Monday around noon, so we have time to compile them for the graduation. We'll be sent also in the wraparound. We'll be including a file folder through the extranet for a graduation themed Zoom background. Oh, calendar link is not working. I'll get that to you all. Actually, Leslie, would you be able to pull up the calendar link for them? Sorry about that. And it'll allow you to download a background that you can use on Zoom when we get to the graduation part of our session. So that'll be coming your way as well. And we'll also provide the reminder next week. We'll give you the link again if you want to download one of those. It's a fun way for people to participate in graduation. And then just if your mailing address has changed for any reason, thank you, Leslie. If your mailing address has changed for any reason, please let us know, because that's where we're going to send you your graduation certificate and the class photo. We're going to take a Zoom photo of everybody in the class and compile those into a graduation photo. So lots of exciting things coming up. We're really looking forward to the last session. And then the last few notes here are just our member benefits associated with the topic. So you can see some of the things we have here under financial management, certainly pro bono consultants with accounting consultants that are in our pro bono program. We've got some resources and publications. Many of those are free for members. And then money saving partners as well. If you all use QuickBook Made Easy, we've got nice trainings for that. And then for fundraising, once again, pro bono, we've got consultants in marketing that can help you with fundraising questions, and money saving partners, as well as publications and information central resources. If you will send an email to me, I'll put my email address in here. If your email address or your mailing address has changed at all, please let me know via email. nonprofits.org. You can shoot me a quick email and I'll be happy to update that in our records. And with that, we'll open it up for office hours. Y'all are welcome to hop off if you need to, or you're welcome to stay on if you have a question. Thanks again for joining us. Thanks to Tracy for being a part of today's session.
Have a great day.
Yeah.
Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a great day.